this episode, we shift from designing cloud foundations to understanding how to see what is actually happening inside them. Because without visibility, even the best architecture becomes guesswork. Cloud logging can feel overwhelming at first, since providers generate enormous amounts of events, metrics, and alerts, and beginners often assume the safest strategy is to collect everything. The reality is that logging is not about volume. It is about relevance, because useful logs are the ones that help you answer real investigation questions when something unusual occurs. If you do not know what questions you want to answer, you may enable logs that consume storage and attention without improving your ability to detect or explain incidents. Cloud logging fundamentals begin with clarity: what actions matter, who can take them, and what evidence you need if something goes wrong. When you choose log sources intentionally, you transform logging from background noise into a powerful investigative tool. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A common mistake in early cloud environments is enabling logs without a clear purpose and assuming that more data equals more security. While comprehensive logging sounds responsible, it can create confusion if the data is not organized or prioritized. Investigations are rarely about scanning random events. They are about reconstructing specific timelines and understanding cause and effect. For example, if a sensitive resource is modified unexpectedly, you need to know who performed the action, from where, and whether that identity had a history of unusual behavior. If an account is compromised, you need to understand what it accessed and what changes it made. These are concrete questions, and they guide which log sources are truly valuable. Logging should be driven by scenarios, not by fear of missing something. When you start with investigation questions, you can map those questions to specific categories of logs rather than treating logging as an endless checklist. One of the most critical categories of cloud logs is identity activity, because identities are the gateway to almost every action in cloud platforms. When an identity authenticates, requests privileges, or changes permissions, those events create a trail that can reveal misuse or compromise. Investigation questions in this area include whether a login occurred from an unusual location, whether a privilege escalation was approved or self-granted, and whether an identity accessed resources outside its normal scope. Without identity logs, these questions become nearly impossible to answer with confidence. Choosing the right identity log sources means ensuring that authentication events, authorization decisions, and role or policy changes are recorded consistently. Beginners sometimes assume that authentication logs alone are enough, but authorization changes can be just as revealing. An identity that quietly gains additional privileges can be more dangerous than one that simply logs in. Another essential category involves control plane activity, which refers to administrative actions that change configuration rather than consume data. Control plane logs capture events such as creating or deleting resources, modifying network rules, altering storage settings, or disabling security features. These logs are vital because many cloud breaches involve configuration changes that weaken defenses rather than direct attacks on applications. Investigation questions here might include whether a firewall rule was opened unexpectedly, whether logging was turned off before suspicious activity, or whether a resource was created in an unusual region. Control plane logs help you reconstruct how the environment evolved over time, not just what data was accessed. Beginners should understand that configuration drift can be malicious or accidental, but in both cases, evidence matters. Without these logs, you are left guessing whether a risky setting was always present or recently introduced. Data access logs form another pillar of effective cloud logging because they show when information is read, written, deleted, or shared. Investigation questions related to data access often focus on whether sensitive information was accessed by unauthorized identities or at unexpected times. If a storage service contains confidential data, you may want to know every time it is accessed from outside normal patterns. Data access logs are sometimes optional or configurable, and that means you must decide whether their value justifies their volume. For high-value data stores, the answer is usually yes, because the ability to confirm or deny data exfiltration can be critical. Beginners should avoid assuming that control plane logs alone provide enough visibility. Administrative actions explain configuration changes, but data access logs explain the impact of those changes. Network logs also play a role in answering investigation questions, particularly when you need to understand how traffic moved between systems. These logs can show which resources communicated, whether unexpected connections occurred, and whether outbound traffic reached suspicious destinations. Investigation questions in this category might include whether a compromised workload attempted lateral movement or whether it initiated connections to unknown external hosts. Network logs help establish patterns of normal communication so that anomalies stand out more clearly. Beginners often overlook network visibility in cloud environments because they focus on application behavior, but attackers frequently exploit network paths to expand their access. Choosing network log sources that capture meaningful connection data can significantly enhance your investigative capabilities. However, like other logs, they should be selected intentionally rather than indiscriminately. A useful technique for selecting log sources is to imagine a hypothetical incident and walk through what you would want to know. Suppose an administrator account is suspected of compromise. You would likely want to see authentication logs, privilege changes, resource modifications, and data access events tied to that identity. If those logs are not enabled, you would quickly encounter blind spots. By conducting these mental exercises before an incident occurs, you can identify which log sources are essential. This approach shifts logging decisions from reactive to proactive. Instead of discovering during an investigation that critical evidence is missing, you confirm in advance that your logging strategy supports your investigative goals. Beginners benefit from this scenario-based thinking because it connects abstract log categories to concrete outcomes. Retention is another aspect of cloud logging fundamentals that relates directly to investigation questions. Logs that are deleted too quickly cannot answer questions about older events, and logs retained indefinitely without organization can become difficult to search. Choosing retention periods should align with both operational needs and regulatory requirements, but it should also reflect realistic investigation timelines. Some incidents are discovered quickly, while others remain hidden for months before detection. If your retention window is shorter than the time it takes to detect certain types of abuse, you may lose critical evidence. Beginners should view retention as a strategic decision rather than a storage setting. The goal is to ensure that when a question arises, the relevant data still exists and is accessible. Integrity and protection of logs are equally important because logs that can be altered or deleted by compromised identities cannot be trusted. Investigation questions rely on accurate evidence, and that evidence must be preserved securely. This often involves centralizing logs in a location with restricted access and ensuring that only specific roles can modify retention or delete records. If an attacker gains administrative access, they may attempt to disable logging or erase traces of activity. By protecting log integrity, you reduce the likelihood that evidence disappears at the moment it becomes most valuable. Beginners sometimes focus heavily on collecting logs, but pay less attention to safeguarding them. Collection without protection creates a false sense of security because the data may not be reliable when needed. Normalization and organization also affect how effectively logs answer investigation questions. Cloud providers may format logs differently, even within the same environment, which can make correlation challenging. If identity logs use one structure and network logs use another, connecting related events requires careful alignment. Normalization involves standardizing formats and fields so that patterns can be detected across services and accounts. Investigation questions often require correlating events from multiple sources, such as linking a login event to a configuration change and then to a data access action. Without normalization, these connections can be slow to uncover. Beginners should recognize that the usefulness of logs depends not only on their presence, but also on their clarity and consistency. Another important consideration is prioritization, because not all logs carry equal investigative value. High-risk services and sensitive data stores deserve more detailed logging than low-risk, temporary workloads. Investigation questions should guide this prioritization, focusing resources on areas where the impact of misuse would be greatest. This does not mean ignoring lower-risk components, but it does mean allocating attention proportionally. By aligning logging intensity with risk levels, you maintain a balance between visibility and manageability. Beginners sometimes fear that selective logging creates gaps, but thoughtful prioritization actually improves signal quality. When logs are chosen based on meaningful questions, they become sharper tools rather than overwhelming streams of data. Cloud logging fundamentals ultimately revolve around intentional design rather than passive enablement. The cloud offers extensive logging capabilities, but their effectiveness depends on how carefully they are selected and managed. Investigation questions provide the blueprint for choosing log sources that matter, ensuring that identity activity, control plane changes, data access, and network behavior are visible when needed. Retention, integrity, and normalization ensure that this visibility remains reliable and usable over time. For new learners, the key lesson is that logging is not an afterthought or a checkbox. It is an investigative strategy embedded into your cloud architecture. By choosing log sources that answer real questions, you build an environment where incidents can be understood, explained, and contained with confidence rather than guesswork.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.